After Jesus Christ's crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension, the apostles continued to spread the gospel, going as far as India and Ethiopia. Unfortunately, most of them met a tragic end, ranging from flaying to beheading. Andrew was a fisherman and a disciple of John the Baptist when he was called by Jesus to become the fisher of men. After Christ's death, resurrection, and ascension, Andrew set out to spread the faith in Scythia and Thrace. In AD 38, he founded the Church of Byzantium. Toward the end of his life, St. Andrew preached the gospel in Achaia, Greece, where he converted the wife of a Roman official. Enraged, he ordered Andrew to be crucified in AD 60. Humbly, the apostle asked to meet his end on an X-shaped cross, as he felt unworthy of dying in the same manner as Jesus Christ. Today, the Cathedral of St. Andrew in Patras, Greece, is home to relics of his skull and the cross on which he died. James the Greater was also a fisherman and was a part of Jesus' inner circle, the three apostles, who shared a closer relationship with him. According to tradition, James traveled to the Iberian Peninsula to carry out his divine mission before returning to Jerusalem, where in AD 44, King Herod Agrippa ordered him to be slain with a sword. Following James's death, his remains were transported to Galicia. Today, they can be found in the Santiago de Compostela Archcathedral Basilica in Spain, one of the world's most visited Christian pilgrimage sites. James's brother and another apostle from Jesus' inner circle, John. He's identified as the beloved disciple of Jesus, who is mentioned 5 times in the Gospel of John, written by John himself. That said, this beloved disciple isn't mentioned in the rest of the Gospels, pointing to a likelihood that John humbly named himself the Beloved. Following the events of the Gospels, John stayed in Jerusalem to lay the foundations for the early church. In AD 45, he moved to Ephesus, where he wrote epistles aiming to strengthen believers' faith in Jesus, promising his grace. In AD 95, Roman Emperor Domitian exiled John to the island of Patmos to prevent him from carrying out his mission. There, he received divine visions, which he wrote down, resulting in the Book of Revelation. A year later, Emperor Nerva, the successor of Emperor Domitian, allowed John to return to Ephesus, where he eventually died of old age in AD 98. Centuries later, in AD 565, a basilica was built to honor his death and shelter his relics. Sadly, hundreds of years later, the church was pillaged by Muslims and leveled by earthquakes, leaving only the ruins. Philip became the 5th apostle when Jesus directly invited him to follow him. He is mentioned in some of the most important events of the Gospels, including the feeding of the 5,000. After Jesus completed his earthly ministry, Philip continued to preach, spreading the gospel through the Levant, Anatolia, and Greece, until he met his end in Hierapolis. There, Philip was crucified upside down for converting the local proconsul's wife. Yet he didn't stop preaching even on the cross. Today, his relics rest in the Church of the 12 Holy Apostles in Rome. Bartholomew, also identified as Nathanael, was called by Philip to meet Jesus, who had great praise for him. Jesus saw Nathanael coming to him, and said of him, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom is no guile." After Jesus ascended into heaven, Bartholomew's mission led him to Mesopotamia, Persia, and even India, where he brought a copy of the Gospel of Matthew. Bartholomew also preached in the Kingdom of Armenia, which eventually became the first state to adopt Christianity as the official religion in AD 301. His ministry ended in Albanopolis, after he converted King Ptolemais to Christianity. The king's brother, fearing that this might tarnish the kingdom's relationship with the Roman Empire, ordered Bartholomew to be skinned alive. Today, his most significant relics rest in the Basilica of St. Bartholomew on the island in Rome. Matthew, the author of one of the Gospels, was working as a tax collector for the Roman Empire until he was called by Jesus to follow him. Christ chose him to be one of the 12, despite Matthew being shunned by his fellow Jews for helping the occupying forces. The Gospel of Matthew distinguishes itself from the rest by emphasizing a Jewish perspective and highlighting that Jesus Christ is indeed the fulfillment of the prophecy awaited for centuries. After Jesus' ascension, Matthew continued preaching in Judea before moving to Ethiopia, where he baptized Iphigenia, a local princess. She eventually took vows and became a nun. However, a new king, Hyrtacus, wanted to marry her and told Matthew that he would receive half of the kingdom if he convinced her to do so. The apostle invited the king to the liturgy, where he told him that the princess is now a bride of Christ, and thus cannot marry him. Enraged, King Hyrtacus ordered one of his soldiers to slay Matthew at the altar. In 954, Apostle Matthew's remains were transferred to Salerno Cathedral in Italy, where they rest to this day. Thomas, the most skeptical of the apostles, distinguished himself by demanding to see the evidence for Jesus' resurrection with his own eyes. "Unless I see in his hands the print of the nails, and place my finger in the mark of the nails, and place my hand in his side, I will not believe." Despite his lingering skepticism, Thomas was always loyal to his master and willing to die with him. Thomas's role in the Gospel of John shows us that we can have doubts and are allowed to question, because ultimately it will only strengthen our faith. After the events of the Gospels, Thomas traveled through Mesopotamia and Persia, setting up the foundation for the Church of the East. In his late 40s, he set out for India, likely traveling farther than any other apostle, reaching Kerala in AD 52. Tragically, in AD 72, Thomas was stabbed with a spear while he was praying on a mountain in Chennai, an attack likely ordered by local authorities to halt his ministry. He was buried in Mylapore, where over 1,000 years later, Portuguese missionaries erected St. Thomas Cathedral Basilica in 1523. James the Less, a name indicating either his younger age or shorter stature to distinguish him from James the Greater, was in some way related to Jesus, and called his brother in the New Testament. That said, the term brother was often used to indicate any sort of kinship, not necessarily a literal sibling relationship. After Jesus' death and resurrection, James the Less remained in Judea to be a pillar of the early church, becoming the first bishop of Jerusalem. In AD 62, he died after being thrown off the temple and stoned by fellow Jews. His relics were transferred to Rome and are held in the Church of the 12 Holy Apostles. Jude Thaddeus plays a minimal role in the Gospels, but he is explicitly mentioned during the Last Supper. Judas, not Iscariot, said to him, "Lord, how is it that you will manifest yourself to us, and not to the world?" Jesus answered him, "If a man loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our home with him." Following the ascension, Thaddeus wrote the Epistle of Jude, warning Christians of heretics. He also preached across Judea and Mesopotamia, until he was executed with a club in Persia. Today, his remains rest in St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican. There isn't much said about Simon the Zealot in the Bible. That said, his name qualifier, the Zealot, gives us a hint about his background and character. It might refer to his zealous nature, or even to a connection with the Zealots, a Second Temple Jewish political movement fighting the Roman occupation. After Christ's ascension, Simon the Zealot preached in Egypt. Later, he formed a team with Jude Thaddeus in Persia until their martyrdom. Horrifyingly, Simon the Zealot was sawn in half, and his relics can be found in St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican. Matthias is the only apostle not chosen by Jesus himself, but through his apostles, after Judas Iscariot betrayed the Messiah. And they cast lots for them, and the lot fell on Matthias, and he was enrolled with the 11 apostles. After the culmination of the Gospels, Matthias preached in Judea, Cappadocia, and Colchis, before returning to Jerusalem, where he was murdered in AD 80 by stoning and beheading. Today, some of his relics are kept in the Abbey of Santa Giustina, Italy, while others rest in the Abbey of St. Matthias, Germany. Paul, another apostle not from the original 12, was a fierce persecutor of Christians whom he blamed for corrupting Judaism. However, it all changed after his encounter with Jesus, which made him one of, if not the most influential apostles. Paul authored nearly half of the New Testament, writing epistles to Christian communities. During his ministry, he had 3 major journeys, spreading the gospel through the Mediterranean. Eventually, he was arrested in Jerusalem due to accusations of defiling the temple by bringing in Gentiles. He was transported to a prison in Caesarea, where he spent 2 years, after which he was moved to Rome and placed under home arrest for 2 more years. 5 years later, he was imprisoned again, and this time he didn't get out. A year later, he was decapitated under Emperor Nero. Today, Paul's remains are resting in the Basilica of St. Paul outside the walls in Rome. Judas Iscariot, the most infamous of the 12, was responsible for the finances of the group. He carried the money box, but was allegedly stealing from it. This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief, and as he had the money box, he used to take what was put into it. This indicates his untrustworthy character, which is fully revealed after he betrays Jesus. For 30 pieces of silver, Judas identified Jesus to the authorities who arrested him, leading to his crucifixion. Judas, overwhelmed by grief, returned the money and hanged himself in a field near Jerusalem. For obvious reasons, Judas is the only one of the 12 who is not canonized as a saint. Peter was called by Jesus while fishing with his brother Andrew. He became one of the main apostles, being featured in many key events of the Gospels. But what set him apart from the rest is that Jesus chose him to set off the apostolic succession. "I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." These keys are reflected in the emblem of the Holy See. After the ascension of Jesus, Peter went on to carry out his mission in Rome, becoming the first bishop of Rome, that is, the first pope. He led the church for 3 decades, until he was sentenced to death under Emperor Nero sometime between AD 64 and 68. Peter was crucified on the Vatican Hill, upside down on his demand, as he felt undeserving of the same death as Jesus Christ. Today, his tomb can be found below the altar of the Confession in St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City.